Hey guys, it's the Crypto-Anarchist here. This part of the video is actually added later on, so the start of the video actually comes here in just a little bit, but there's two things I forgot in this video, so I just wanted to say them real quickly. And both of them have to do with centralization. So the first thing is that a market preferring to have efficient use of resources is not centralization. So when people say Bitcoin Cash's big nodes are centralization, that's not true. It's just that, more powerful computers are they work better as nodes, and that's just the way it is. It's just like if you want to go and be a farmer right now, you should probably get a tractor. If you don't have a tractor, you're going to have a lot of trouble being a farmer. That's just the way it is. So economies of scale that's the way markets work. If you're a communist, you don't like it, and I know a lot of the people who support Segwit, they're communists, whatever. But to say that the fact that a market prefers things that are more efficient, that's not centralization. An actual example of centralization is what the Bitcoin Segwit or the core developers did with the big blockers. So a lot of the people who support big blocks, like Gavin Andresen and Craig Wright, like Gavin Andresen literally had his keys revoked by the small block group because he was a big proponent of big blocks and he kept getting in their way, and so they revoked his access after after Craig supposedly showed Gavin the keys proving he was Satoshi Nakamoto. Again, the only two people that Craig has shown the keys proving he's Satoshi to are Craig Wright and John Matonis. John Matonis now works for Craig Wright, and Gavin has always said that Craig is Satoshi. So, the two people that Craig has showed the actual keys to, they completely believe in him. But anyways, centralization is when the Bitcoin core team literally revoked access to Gavin Andresen, and so they sort of killed all the big blockers that were part of the team. It's just a real stupid thing to do once, or to begin with, but yeah, that's centralization. Centralization means you actually have control over something, over a central point of failure, and the having access to change the code, that's a centralized point of power. That's where a centralized point of failure in the system. If you have the wrong people who have access to those keys, the system will fail. And so when people talk about centralization, the Segwit developers are very big into centralization. They're very big into censorship. And the other thing is that the Lightning Network, we've talked about this before on my channel, this second point here, but the Lightning Network, the way the Lightning Network works is that when your channel gets rooted, there's only a couple of Lightning hubs that will even be capable of rooting your transaction. And so this means that the Lightning Network is centralized, because if those Lightning hubs do not root your transaction, then you can't use the Lightning Network, so you can get censored off the network. So when people talk about centralization, one, the entire creation of Bitcoin Segwit was centralized because they literally revoked access to one of the biggest members of the development team, Gavin Andresen. They literally took away his access to making changes on the code for Bitcoin itself. And then two, if you can censor people off of using the Lightning Network, then it's completely centralized by the Lightning hubs. And if you actually look at the connections on the current Lightning Network, it's a very centralized hub and spoke network. But anyways, I just wanted to add those real quickly. Here's the rest of the video. Hey everybody, it's Crypto-Anarchist here again, and I'm bringing you another video on cryptocurrencies. And in today's video, what we're talking about is just common arguments against Bitcoin Cash from Segwit supporters, and why it's so frustrating talking to Segwit supporters. Because if you've ever tried to do it, all they ever do is they'll change the subject, and inevitably they just keep on repeating Bcash, 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 and it's like, okay, you don't have arguments, whatever. But what I wanted to do in this video was come up with the most common arguments I see against Bitcoin Cash, and then just kind of demolish them, because they're not good arguments. I don't think most Segwit supporters really understand the coin they're invested in. To be honest, I don't think most people involved in Bitcoin Cash really understand that coin as well. I know when I see people like Roger Ver and stuff give interviews, they could make a lot better points, and they don't. So I just kind of want to put this out here so everybody knows, they know all the answers to all the questions that are given by Segwit supporters, and they have good responses and whatnot, because all the arguments that the Segwit supporters make they're pretty poor. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. The first argument, and this is the most common argument that the Segwit supporters give, is that if you have large blocks, you're centralizing the node validation process. And so this one to me is kind of hilarious, because the large blocks are there to scale, right? You can't scale Bitcoin with 1 megabyte blocks, and then The Segwit supporters, they're in favor of scaling using Lightning. Well, what is Lightning? Lightning is an off-chain solution for transactions. So if they're off the blockchain, that means the transactions don't even show up on the blockchain. Yes, every once in a while they get cleared on the blockchain, but with Segwit, the way it works, you'll have thousands, hundreds or thousands of transactions off the blockchain cleared by one transaction on the blockchain. So that means one on chain transaction might clear 100 people's off-chain transactions. So that means that all these transactions done off the blockchain, they're not getting validated by nodes. So everything done on the Lightning Network, it's not even possible to validate these transactions by nodes. So if the Segwit supporters are super worried about having their transactions validated by nodes on the blockchain, why are they moving all their transactions off the blockchain where it's literally physically impossible to validate these transactions? Okay, if you're worried about transactions being validated, then you kind of really need big nodes or you need big blocks because you need all the transactions done on the blockchain. You can't say that you want small blocks so that you get more transaction validation by nodes and then also be in favor of moving all of your transactions. And it's not all the transactions, but in order for Lightning to scale, it's like 99.99% of transactions or 99.9% of transactions have to be done off the blockchain. So you've got two options. You've got Bitcoin Cash, where all the transactions are done on the blockchain, and you can. And another thing to remember here, and we'll talk about this later, but Bitcoin Cash has a version of Lightning. In Bitcoin Cash's version of Lightning, there's still a one-to-one relationship for off-chain transactions to on-chain transactions. So even though you move transactions off the blockchain, when they finally get cleared, it's just one transaction off-chain to one transaction on-chain. And so you still have complete what they call it blockchain auditability, but node validation is not affected by Bitcoin Cash's version of Lightning. But because Segwit shares channels between users, you can have 1,000 users all have their transaction cleared by one or their transactions cleared off-chain by one transaction on-chain. So this argument makes no sense, and it makes me laugh every time, but I don't think the Segwit supporters really understand this. So if you really want full node validation, you cannot use the Segwit version of Lightning because that ensures that you do not get node validation of transactions. So that argument is just kind of retarded. The next one is the second point is they always say you can't have Lightning without Segwit. This thing really boggles my mind. This thing really boggles my mind because you can have Lightning without Segwit, and you can even have Lightning with transaction malleability. Okay, you don't even need to remove transaction malleability. Now, if you have transaction malleability in there, there are certain negatives to the way that you create Lightning. You can do it. One way is through a hash locked escrow, and if you do it through a hash locked escrow, basically the way you do it is that both people have to you have to put more funding Bitcoin into your Lightning channels. That's one way to do it with malleability. There's other ways to do it with malleability, but each one of these ways, again, you have certain negatives to it. One negative of a way to do it with malleability is that your funds can get locked up, or your funds will be locked up for a certain period of time. But you can do Lightning with malleability. Now, the only real thing, or the only real problem with no malleability fix is that if you don't have a malleability fix, there are these negatives involved with Lightning transactions, and so most people, if they want Lightning, what they consider to be Lightning, they want a malleability fix, but you can do malleability fixes through flexible transactions. That's something that I think the Bitcoin Unlimited team was working on, but all you really need if you want the Lightning is a malleability fix. Now, the one thing that Segwit does that Bitcoin Cash cannot do, or at least as far as I know, and again, this is really high-level stuff, so there might be some developer out there that will have a really obscure solution for this issue, but the one thing that Segwit does that you can't do with Bitcoin Cash in its version of Lightning is that Segwit shares channels with other users, okay? And this is where the issue comes, because when you share channels, like I said before, you have multiple transactions off the blockchain that are cleared by single transactions on the blockchain, and so you lose all this node validation process, okay? And the node validation process is big. The whole reason that you trust in Bitcoin is because you can look at the blockchain and say, hey, there's all the transactions that have ever been done on Bitcoin. So if you use the Segwit version of Lightning and you look at the blockchain, it's like, okay, these are the clearing transactions on Bitcoin, but there's technically thousands of more transactions that occurred, and we don't know if those are valid or not, because the Segwit version of Lightning, at least the way they're implementing it, there's no information on the transactions done off the blockchain. So you're just like, we assume that the transactions are valid, but we don't really know. It's like right now with the Lightning version that is out, transactions just get lost, and it's like, where'd the money go? We don't really know. But when people say you can't have Lightning without Segwit, that's a complete lie. You can have Lightning with transaction malleability. It's just harder to implement, and there's negatives. Like, there's more negatives when you open a channel. There's more things you have to worry about with security. And then you can also do a transaction malleability fix without Segwit, and you'll be just fine. And again, generally speaking, the way that you do these versions of Lightning without Segwit is you have an operator running the Lightning channels. So right now, the way that the Segwit version of Lightning works is that you don't have any operator running these Lightning channels. They're just done automatically through smart contracts, and people are like, oh, that's way better because it's not centralized. And it's like, no, that's not true, because when you have funds being lost on the smart contract version of Lightning, there's no one in charge of it and there's no one responsible. So a lot of the issues you have with funds being lost on the Segwit version of Lightning, or like we'll talk about this later, the block congestion issue with the Segwit version of Lightning, if that were to occur on the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning, there's an operator of your Lightning channels and he is responsible. And the other thing is this operator can set up channels such that if there is some sort of like congestion issue with the Lightning channels, and a congestion issue just means for like the network gets so congested you can't clear your channel before it automatically clears. So when that means that if you can't clear your channel before it automatically clears, then the wrong amount of funds get sent to each user. But if you have an operator running your channel, the operator can set up channels so that he is still has somewhat control over those funds. So in the event of a congestion issue, and he can set up smart contracts to make sure that he's not actually like multi-signature accounts and whatnot to make sure that he can't steal your funds. But in the event of congestion, this operator could have multi-signature set up so that he can actually reverse transactions or whatever and make the amounts that to each Bitcoin user be the proper amount. And so there's no way to do that with the Segwit version because there's no operator involved. And so a lot of people say, oh, you have to have operators to do the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning. It's like, yeah, that's the point, because everything you do off the blockchain it involves counterparty risk and trust. And so if you have to involve counterparty risk and trust, smart contracts are not enough because they just automatically do whatever they're supposed to do, even if it's the wrong thing. So it's kind of a dumb thing to talk about. And then I guess one more point to talk about too is if you look at the transaction fees on Bitcoin Segwit, right now they're about 250 times higher than that on Bitcoin Cash. That's about the lowest ratio it's ever been. So this is like the best time for Bitcoin Segwit if you involve the transaction math here. But if the transaction fees on Bitcoin Segwit are 250 times larger than that of Bitcoin Cash, and the other thing you have to know is in order to have a fully connected Segwit Lightning network that isn't centralized and controlled by large corporations with large Lightning hubs, each user has to have on average about 14 channels open. So 14 channels open at 250 times the fee, it means that you're going to have actually 3,500 times the average Bitcoin Cash fee just in order to open up enough Lightning channels to be able to use the network. And then you're supposed to be able to close 3 Lightning channels a year in order to keep using that network. And so that's an additional 750 fees, or 750 times the average Bitcoin Cash fee just to use it for each year after that. And so if you do the math here and you just figure out how many average transactions your average person does, if you go to Bitcoin Cash 1, even if you're not using the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning, you're still probably going to have lower fees because most people don't actually do 2 transactions a day. They do less than that. Most people do, between 1 to 2 transactions a day. So it's about even the average Bitcoin Cash transaction, or your total Bitcoin Cash transactions, to if you have a fully upgraded version of Bitcoin Lightning. And that's assuming the transaction fees don't increase when Lightning comes out. And everybody knows transaction fees have to increase when Lightning comes out because there's more fees going to nodes. So there will be more money available for those nodes to pay transaction fees for on-chain transactions. But even assuming that doesn't occur, as long as you have Bitcoin Cash people using a couple Lightning channels, all that costs for the Bitcoin Cash Lightning channels is, it's like 1 cent to open up the feed or open up the channel and 1 cent to close it. And all the Bitcoin Cash people have to do is open up a couple of Lightning channels with, like, let's say their grocery store, a couple gas stations, their bank, and then when they do that, they're only paying one fee over a specified duration to these different stores that they do a lot of business with, and so they actually can cut down the number of fees that they have to pay on the network basically by half. And so then the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning is more efficient than the Bitcoin Segwit version of Lightning, because they're both even. Like if Bitcoin Cash doesn't have Lightning, they're both about even. And then if you use the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning, you cut down your fees significantly with any sort of business entity with which you do a lot of transactions, and so you actually pay less in transaction fees on Bitcoin Cash's blockchain. So not only can you have Lightning without Segwit, the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning is far more efficient than the Bitcoin Segwit version of Lightning. So I don't know why this gets brought up, and I don't know why the Bitcoin Cash people don't say, hey, we've got Lightning, and if you actually do the math, our version of Lightning is far more efficient, and it's more secure too, because again, Bitcoin Cash, you have a one-to-one relationship between off-chain transactions to on-chain transactions. With Bitcoin Segwit, that doesn't exist. That's the whole point of Segwit, is to share transactions. So you don't know if transactions are valid, you're just hoping that the system worked, and there's no way to check or validate it. Let's go on to the third point here. Non-Segwit coins give too much power to miners. Now, the reason why they say this, like they say big blocks and big node, or if you have big blocks, your nodes have to be powerful enough to run the blockchain, and they say this gives too much power to miners. Well, there's a couple of things wrong with this. One, the vast majority of miners do not actually run full nodes. They work in pools, so they don't give a shit about full nodes. It's only node operators that really have to be running full nodes. So how this exactly gives power to miners, I don't know. I mean, it sort of gives some power to node operators, but again, they're the ones who have to invest in all this technology just to make sure that all this stuff's working. So it sort of gives power to them, but it also places just more responsibility on them. But the real point here that I want to talk about is in terms of giving power to miners is what is known as selfish mining. So if you're not aware, selfish mining is a way to mine on Bitcoin that where you don't actually release your block once you find it. So obviously when a miner finds a block, they're supposed to release it to the network, and when they release it to the network, they get their payment, and then every other miner on the block or on the blockchain starts working on the next block, and everyone tries to find that next block and then release it so that they can get payment. Well, the way selfish mining works is you actually do not release a block when you find it. You wait and you hold it, because when you have that block and when you found that block, you can start working on the next block, and if you don't release it to the other miners still are working on the old block, so you're making other miners waste all of their work, right? And so the reason why this is useful is because if you own up to 33% of the hash rate, you can actually make the rest of the miners waste enough work that you will always be more profitable than the other miners. So you can actually attack the network with less than 33% of the hash rate. So the thing about selfish mining is if someone tries to do selfish mining against Bitcoin Cash, there's a very simple defense. The very simple defense is that every other pool starts engaging in selfish mining themselves. And so what happens is that this basically makes Bitcoin mining not profitable whatsoever, and so everyone loses a huge amount of money, and it's basically whoever has the most amount of money to begin with wins. And one of the things with selfish mining is that selfish mining is basically best when you're smaller. And so if a small miner starts selfish mining, the big miners all say, okay, let's all just selfish mine, and then they bankrupt the small selfish miner and they go back to honest mining. So basically people don't do selfish mining, because if they do, it just screws over every miner, and that's just basically it. However, with Segwit, there's a modified version of selfish mining, and I'm going to term it altruistic selfish mining, because like I said, with normal selfish mining, when you find a block, you don't release it to the network, okay? And you don't release it to the network because you want to get a head start on working on the next block. With the altruistic version of selfish mining in Segwit, when you find a block, you do release it to the network, but you don't release the signatures. And the reason why you don't release the signatures is this means that anyone who follows the Segwit protocol will not accept your block as valid, and so they won't start mining on the next block. However, anyone who says Segwit or who wants to revert to the old Bitcoin rules where Segwit hadn't been implemented yet, they can start mining on that block. They can just not care about the signatures, and they can start mining that block, and anyone who does this will get a massive advantage, because as soon as a Segwit supporting miner releases their block, what the altruistic selfish miner does is they release the signatures. And so once the altruistic selfish miner releases the signatures, the block that they mined is a valid Segwit block. Okay, so the reason why this is such a different attack than the selfish mining attack is because the altruistic selfish mining attack, it lets every other miner on the network join the cartel. And the other problem with the altruistic selfish mining attack is if you get enough miners, like let's say, because again, if you hit 33% and you start the selfish mining, it's very hard to stop the selfish miner. But if you hit 51% miners in your cartel on the altruistic selfish mining attack, that just means you have 51% of miners who are mining on blocks that do not have signatures released yet. Once that is true, every transaction in that block can be forged by a miner because there are not signatures in there. And the way Segwit works is that Segwit addresses are called anyone can spend addresses. So if miners are mining on a block that does not have signatures in it, and you have people using Segwit addresses, which are anyone can spend addresses, then that means these miners can just forge signatures and get transactions sent to their own wallets, and then they can distribute these transactions among the people in the cartel. So the selfish mining attack, all you can do is get ahead on blocks, but the altruistic selfish mining attack is you get ahead on blocks and then you can forge transactions. Okay, and again, the one defense to a selfish mining attack is for the other miners to engage in selfish mining, which means that everybody loses a massive amount of money. So if you're a small miner and someone does this altruistic selfish mining attack and you realize, okay, this blockchain is going to become completely unprofitable for me to mine, the most profit you can make is to join the altruistic selfish miner, because then as long, like, you know that the blockchain is going to become unprofitable to mine, but at least you'll be able to steal other people's transactions and forge transactions and get away with all their money. And so one thing that a lot of Segwit supporters might say is, yeah, but we'll just fork the blockchain if you do this. Well, I mean, if you fork the blockchain, so long as the altruistic selfish miners are making enough money, all they do is switch over to the new blockchain that you forked. And so the only defense against this is to centralize the network. And so this is really a really dangerous thing in Segwit, because all it requires is somebody to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to start doing the altruistic selfish mining attack, and I'm going to start trying to forge transactions, and there's really no defense against it. There's really no defense, because all the incentives change, because with the altruistic selfish mining attack, like I said, if you can get 51% of miners in your cartel, then you can forge transactions. So whereas with the normal selfish mining attack, all you can do is get ahead on blocks for as long as the rest of the miners are being honest, and again, like I said, the rest of the miners won't be honest. They'll just form their own cartels and they'll mine against you, and then it'll just be a race to see who can not lose money the fastest. But with the altruistic selfish mining attack, the incentives are changed, because if you join the altruistic selfish miner's cartel, you can forge transactions. So his cartel is always more profitable than every other cartel that exists. And so, that's really not a good thing. It's really not a good thing whatsoever. But moving on, again, so you can't say Bitcoin Cash gives more power to miners, because Bitcoin Segwit gives a power to miners to forge transactions, and there's really no defense against it other than hoping that people don't do it. The next thing that people talk about is they say small blocks increase security, small blocks and high fees. Well, that's not really true at all. What increases security is the hash rate. So you could say indirectly small blocks, or not small blocks, but high fees increase the security of the network. Sort of, yeah, but it also dissuades transactions from occurring, so it's a double-edged sword. But it's hash rate that is security. The one thing that is true is Bitcoin Segwit obviously has a higher hash rate than Bitcoin Cash. But if you're talking about security, and this goes back to the Lightning Network, and we talked about this a little bit before, but you can have congestion on on Bitcoin Segwit's version of the Lightning Network, and it's almost impossible not to have congestion on Bitcoin Segwit's version of the Lightning Network because, again, Bitcoin Cash's version of the Lightning Network, there's a one-to-one relationship between off-chain transactions to on-chain transactions, and a lot of people are going to be like, well, then why? How do you actually save fees? Because the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning, it's just a tab. When you go to a bar and you start a tab at a bar, it's not like those are multiple transactions. That's just one transaction you start and you don't pay till you finish. That's what a Bitcoin Cash Lightning channel is. It's just a transaction you start, you don't pay till you're finished. The Bitcoin Segwit version of Lightning, it's a channel that you open and you start a transaction, and that transaction you started can be finished by other people, so you don't have to finish it yourself. And that's why this congestion becomes a real problem, because when you close channels, or like channels off or channels on chain, are related to thousands of channels or transactions off chain. So if you try and close all these off chain transactions at once, you'll find that you don't have room on the blockchain. Whereas with Bitcoin Cash, you know, like if you know how many transactions off chain you have, like it's a one-to-one relationship to transactions on chain. So you always know, like, is there going to be a transaction issue? You know if it's going to come up because it's a one-to-one relationship. The sharing of channels where things gets really bad. But if you have a congestion on Bitcoin Segwit's version of Lightning, or any version of Lightning, you can steal funds. And again, all that you need is one malicious Lightning node to just be like, hey, I'm going to start a bunch of channels, and then I'm going to force them all to expire quickly and just screw over the network, and then people lose funds. So small blocks with Segwit, with sharing of Lightning channels, it's a terrible idea. Again, and this is just because Segwit, it's a fractional reserve system. I've talked about this before in other videos, but you share other people's channels, so you pretend like you have more blockchain than you do, backing the channels that are on Lightning. Okay, just like with fractional reserves, when the U.S. was on a gold standard, they pretended like they had enough gold to validate all the dollars that they had created, when they actually didn't. They were just pretending. Segwit allows the sharing of channels, so with gold, you know, with fractional reserves and gold, you're sharing other people's gold that you think is yours. With Segwit, you're sharing other people's channels, and you're sharing the blockchain when you think you have that blockchain reserved for yourself privately, but you don't. You're sharing it. Okay, so just like fractional reserves shares gold, Segwit, the fractional reserves it introduces to the blockchain, it shares the blockchain. And if you have a shared blockchain, it doesn't really work. You have to have each person have enough space on the blockchain for their transactions. Otherwise, you have massive congestion problems. So again, this congestion problem can sort of happen for Bitcoin Cash, but you'd have to be mentally retarded not to see it coming, because you have a one-to-one relationship to transactions off the blockchain to transactions on the blockchain. So this isn't really an issue that's ever going to come up with Bitcoin Cash, but with Bitcoin Segwit, it's always an issue because it's a fractional reserve system. And when this issue happens, it's just like any other bank run. The only way to stop it is to freeze all transactions. Okay, that's the way that you stop bank runs in fractional reserve systems, is you freeze all bank withdrawals. And so with Lightning, the only way to stop this is to freeze all Lightning withdrawals. It's literally a fractional reserve system. The reason that Bitcoin was created was to replace the fractional reserve banking system we have, and then Segwit was introduced, and we created Bitcoin as a fractional reserve blockchain system. It's completely retarded. Next thing that people talk about is the privacy aspects of Bitcoin Lightning. And having more privacy can be good. The issue with Bitcoin Lightning is you don't have a choice to have blockchain auditability. The way that they're doing Bitcoin Lightning is you never have any idea how your channel gets routed, where it gets routed. Andreas Antonopoulos says this all the time. He's like, you don't know how your channel got where it got, but you don't care, because you know it got there. You don't care. That's what Andreas always says. But there's also a reversal of what Andreas says that is really a terrible and terrifying thing to think about. If your transaction does not get where it was supposed to go, you do not know where your transaction went, and you do care, but there's nothing you can do about it. So the way that a blockchain works, and the reason why you trust it, is because if something goes wrong, and things have gone wrong before, okay? You guys remember that one time when there were 2 transactions of 92 billion Bitcoin created? If that happens on the Lightning Network, nobody has a fucking clue. Nobody knows, because nobody, like, you don't know what's going on the Lightning Network. However, with and that bug might not really work out with the Lightning Network. Again, the issue with the Lightning Network, the one thing you have to worry about is if your transaction does not go through, you need to know where your funds are. But because of the way the Lightning Network is built, you don't have a fucking clue where they went. So if your transaction is lost, it's lost forever, and there's nothing you can do. You can't look at the blockchain and be like, oh, here's the bug that happened. there's the transaction. You can see exactly what happened and where it went. So we just got to fork it and redo the blockchain. Because that's usually the way, like if a bug happens in Bitcoin, that's what you do. You fork it, whether it's a soft or a hard fork, and you just redo the blockchain. It's like, okay, nothing lost. However, with Bitcoin Lightning, you have no idea where your coins went. You don't know what the bug was. You don't know what the fuck happened whatsoever. And so you're just at a loss, and there's nothing you can do. Okay, there's literally nothing you can do. So the privacy on Bitcoin Lightning, yeah, in some cases it's a good thing, but in some cases it's a terrible thing. The whole point of a blockchain, the entire point, is so that you can look at the blockchain and say, hey, look, we know it's all valid because all the transactions are there. Every single person can show or can trust in their transaction because their transaction is on the blockchain. Okay, so nobody has to trust in anything. But with Bitcoin Lightning, you have to trust that the system works, because if it doesn't, you're just fucked. There's nothing you can do. The other thing too is that they talk about, oh yeah, but those bugs don't happen that often, so you don't really have to worry about that much. And that might be true. You don't have to worry about it that much, but why would you trust in something that's only partially trustworthy when you have something that is 100% trustworthy in Bitcoin Cash's blockchain, But if we even go further on and say, okay, well, let's just examine the privacy that the two coins offer. Well, Bitcoin Cash right now, it's working on implementing, the ZK Snark protocol, the Zero Coin protocol, the Ring Signature protocol. All these things were supposed to be implemented on top of Bitcoin anyways. So they're already working on doing that. They have to reinstate the script opcodes, which they're working on. So as far as privacy goes, Bitcoin Cash is literally going to have eventually, and I don't know exactly when this is coming out, but they will eventually have all of the privacy options built on top of Bitcoin Cash. And even if that doesn't work, you still have atomic swaps. So if you do an atomic swap between a privacy coin like Zcoin, Pivx, Zcash, Zencash, maybe even Verge. Verge isn't all that privacy centric, to be honest, but if you do an atomic swap between one of these privacy centric coins, then you can actually get all the privacy attributes of that coin and then just swap back to Bitcoin, and then your coins have been they've been newly minted, and so there's no way to do blockchain analysis on your coins. Even if they don't build things on top of Bitcoin Cash, we already have atomic swaps, so they just have to implement a good GUI and a good way for users to actually use that. So privacy on Bitcoin Cash is basically as good as it gets. Like, you can't get any better. And because the fees on Bitcoin Cash are so low, like people talk about atomic swaps through the Lightning Network, again, if fees are so high on Bitcoin Segwit, you're paying a lot of money just to do an atomic swap transaction to get privacy. With Bitcoin Cash, the fees are below 1 cent. That's the median fee, is below 1 cent. So if the median fee is below 1 cent, you're paying 1 cent to get perfect privacy. So the privacy is better on Bitcoin Cash. Next point I want to talk to you guys about is scaling Bitcoin Cash, or scaling without second layer solutions. A lot of people say, oh, you can't scale Bitcoin without second layer solutions, and the truth is actually the exact opposite. And this one sort of boggles my mind because this is in the goddamn Bitcoin Lightning white paper. If you look at the Bitcoin Lightning white paper, it says with 1 megabyte blocks you can scale to support 35 million users. Last time I checked, there were more than 35 million people in the world. So if you assume that there's going to be, about 5 billion people using the network, you basically got to have at least 150 megabyte blocks to 200 megabyte blocks. And like I said, if you just have barely enough space on the blockchain, you run into congestion problems. So realistically, I mean, you need like between 300 to 500 megabyte blocks to have the Lightning Network work on Segwit and not have risks of congestion issues and having your funds stolen. So like, I don't understand this statement at all. Second layer solutions cannot scale without a large blockchain. Okay, it's not the reverse. It's not, you can't scale without second layer solutions. It's second layer solutions cannot scale without a large blockchain. Okay, they can't. And then the second thing you got to look at is they actually did the math here. It's an interesting article, but if you use not even the highest end equipment that's out right now. I know a lot of the Bitcoin Cash developers and stuff have released a lot of information on like optical methods of storing data, and these optical methods are like super efficient and whatnot. But even if you just use like modern, normal methods of storing the blockchain and things like that, you can actually run a profitable blockchain with 0 block reward and 1 terabyte block sizes. Okay, so this is just when people are paying fees, and they assumed that the fees that people pay are 1/10 of a cent per transaction, which is very low. If that's very low. If you have 1/10 of a cent per transaction, you can do 1 terabyte block sizes and with 0 block reward. So You can scale without second layer solutions, and in fact, second layer solutions cannot scale without a big blockchain. And secondly, there's enough, like even if you assume minuscule fees, you will still have enough money to secure the blockchain and have profitable mining with 1 terabyte block sizes. And just so you guys know, 1 terabyte block sizes, that gives enough transactions for, it's like 56 transactions per person per day. Okay. You don't need to do 56 transactions per person per day. And like I said before, each person generally does about like 2. That's about how many transactions each person does a day. A lot of times people do a lot less. So it's easily scalable. And again, like I said, you still have the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning on top of that. And so you can do, that's 56 transactions, plus if you have a lot of transactions or with one business entity that you keep going back to, like your gas stations or your grocery store or your bank, you don't actually have to you don't have to have 1 fee per transaction. You can have 1 transaction extended over a long period of time that clears on the blockchain, so that you only have 1 fee or 1 transaction with them per month or something, or per 3 months, whatever you want to make it. And if you do it that way, you're actually still lowering the amount of transactions you have to use on the network. So this doesn't really make any sense. This video is actually taking a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I guess I wanted to make it really in depth here. There's going to be a part 2 coming out, but I hope this at least helps you out. Just always remember, I'm going to go through this real quickly. The large blocks don't centralize the node validation process, and if you're worried about that, you can't trust the Lightning Network, because there literally 0 transactions on the Lightning Network are validated by nodes. So that's a stupid argument from Segwit supporters. You can have Lightning without Segwit, and you can even have Lightning without a malleability fix. Segwit coins, the Segwit people always say you give too much power to mining, or too much power to miners with Bitcoin Cash, but always remember there's the Segwit selfish mining attack. I called it the altruistic selfish mining attack, where when you do this attack, you can actually forge transactions, and it's the most profitable way to mine Bitcoin Segwit, and there's no defense against it really, because if you try to do selfish mining against the altruistic selfish miner, the altruistic selfish miner is releasing his block immediately, whereas the normal selfish miners, they're keeping the block to themselves. So the altruistic selfish miner will always win, because he can get other people to join his cartel. It's a retarded how much power that Segwit gives to miners, and the fact that the most profitable way to mine with Bitcoin Segwit is actually to try and forge transactions. So that's a retarded argument from the Segwit supporters. Small blocks and high fees don't increase security. High fees sort of do, but small blocks, again, the congestion caused with the Segwit version of Lightning is ridiculous, and you can get your funds stolen from you if the network gets congested, and there's no way to avoid this if you have small blocks with Segwit. And the fact that Segwit has you share channels, that means that you have multiple transactions that can have to clear through one channel on the network, and so there's no way to avoid this, because it's a fractional reserve system. You're sharing the blockchain, whereas with Bitcoin Cash there is no sharing of the blockchain. All your transactions have a specific spot on the blockchain, and no one shares it. So that's not an issue. For the congestion issue is not really an issue for Bitcoin Cash, but it is for Bitcoin Segwit. Again, the privacy on the Lightning Network. You have privacy on Bitcoin Cash because you have big blocks, and they can adopt every single privacy protocol that every other altcoin has. And even if they don't, you can still do atomic swaps, and the atomic swaps are far more efficient than the atomic swaps on Bitcoin Segwit. So privacy is much better on Bitcoin Cash. And then scaling without second layers, I guess I don't really need to re-say this, because we just talked about it, but second layer solutions cannot scale without large blocks. Like, this is a retarded argument. You need massive blocks to have the Lightning Network scale. But I hope this sort of helped you. Again, there's going to be a part 2 coming out, so just wait around for this. But I really wanted everyone to know that every argument from a Segwit supporter is a bad argument. You just have to know in depth the responses to it, and it just becomes laughably stupid once you know the responses, because Segwit supporters literally have no arguments for why you would want Segwit. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. There will be more videos coming out soon.